Well, when I tell you I'm going to do something, you've got to know I'm going to do it. I'm referring to a show we did a couple weeks ago in regards to drug policies. And I had told you that I had seen this phenomenal blog just breaking down the importance of having a drug policy. And with so many of you having locations in states where they've been adding recreational marijuana, some of you have been just fighting with this whole medical marijuana conversation, and now changing from Schedule 3 to Schedule 1. What are we going to do? Are they really going to do that? I really felt it was important to bring this attorney on. And I'm referring to Doug Oldham. Doug's with Barnes and Thornburg Law right here in Columbus, Ohio. And Doug, I'm going to just pull you into the show now because I told the viewers and listeners here a couple weeks ago when I kind of touched on the topic, I said, Doug's got a very definitive and specific way of looking at this. So I want you to get your pencils and papers out because it is an important policy. Everyone, if you don't have a drug policy in your toolbox, if it's not a part of your handbook, if it's not a separate addendum that you're having your employees sign, I really want you to think hard and listen to what Doug's trying to stress today, because it's, with all the drugs out there, marijuana is still the one that really drives us nuts. Doug, I mean, why did you choose to do that article?
Well, thanks for having me, Pandy. On August 6th of this year, Ohio officially made recreational marijuana legal. And now adults who are 21 and older can purchase and consume marijuana legally. They can grow a little bit of marijuana. Recreational marijuana is being sold in 98 dispensaries around the state. And, this is an interesting topic because anytime a state legalizes recreational marijuana, a lot of employers call me and they feel like the sky's falling. They think that their whole staff is going to start walking around under the influence and there are going to be widespread accidents, problems. And so, I always have to calm people down and just remind them, first of all, what the law is, and then what they can do to make sure that they have a policy that they're comfortable with and that will protect them and their workplaces and treat their employees fairly as well. Even though recreational marijuana has been legalized, the law on marijuana has a section for employers that really gives employers a lot of protections here. Employers are still allowed to have a zero tolerance policy toward marijuana. Even though it's technically legal here, doesn't mean employers have to allow it in any way, shape, or form. Employers do not have to allow employees to use, possess, or distribute marijuana either at work or even on their free time outside of it. Employers are still allowed to discipline, terminate, refuse to hire, or take any other adverse actions because an employee or applicant uses or possesses marijuana. So really, this isn't a change at all.
Well, let me stop you. Let me stop you right there. One of the questions I get, and here in Ohio for medical marijuana, the employers are allowed to ask that question in the interviewing process. Because of recreational marijuana and because so many companies, they have those safety sensitive positions, are they allowed to ask if individuals are using recreational marijuana in the interviewing process?
They can ask that, and they can ask about it, or they can drug test applicants. And some states have laws saying that you cannot test an applicant for marijuana because even if you have a zero tolerance policy, that policy wasn't in effect for that applicant before they had the job. Ohio does not have that restriction. If you want to test an applicant, in the post-offer stage, and they come back positive for marijuana use, you're allowed to decide not to hire them, even if they used that marijuana before they were subject to your policies, even if they use that marijuana legally. Employers are still basically allowed to, have whatever sort of policy they want even if that's a zero tolerance policy.
Okay. And when we're talking about a policy, we're talking about a written policy, a cultural policy. What is considered a policy when it comes to this topic?
Good question, Pandy. I think the first thing every employer in Ohio needs to do before they put anything in writing is really decide what their attitude toward marijuana is. And we're seeing a number of different attitudes. I think the two most prevalent attitudes are these. The first is a lot of employers are treating marijuana like they treat alcohol. Basically saying, hey, if you go home and you use marijuana in your free time and you're not coming to work under the influence and we're not seeing any problems with your performance or your demeanor, we don't have a problem with it. Do what you want. Just don't bring it to work. Either physically bring it to work or bring it to work through your conduct being under the influence. The opposite approach that we're seeing employers take is to maintain a zero tolerance policy. And employers are saying, even though this is legal under Ohio law, it's still unlawful under federal law. I know that that's changing a little bit, but still employers can take a zero tolerance policy. And they can say, hey, if we find out you're using marijuana, if you have a positive test, we're going to terminate you. Either approach is fine, but I think it's important to figure out how you want to approach this issue. Once you've determined your attitude, I think the next step is to communicate that approach to your employees so that expectations are clear. First of all, you want to be fair with employees. If you're going to have a zero tolerance policy, I think it's only fair to warn employees like, hey, we are not allowing you to use marijuana, even in your free time. We will test for this. If we come up with a positive test for you, we will take corrective action. We will terminate you. Let employees know that. One, it's fair. Two, it's efficient for employers. You don't want to have employees who continue to violate this policy simply because they don't know what it is. You want to make sure you're educating employees on your policy. I would have a written policy that you distribute. Perhaps you go a step further and you have some sort of bulletin board posting, email, whatever techniques you use to let employees know about new policies.
I absolutely love the fact that you just brought up two very good points that the viewers and listeners have heard me say over and over again. And viewers, I want you to back up to listen to what he just said. Consequences. Did you hear him say you need to have a consequence associated with, if we find that you're using it, this is what's going to happen. If we suspect that you're using, this is what's going to happen. And to stay consistent with that. Now, we've talked about this. What happens when you have consequences? People start taking you seriously in regards, your employees are going to start realizing, oh, wait a minute, this is a serious topic and maybe I shouldn't. If I want to stay employed, I really shouldn't partake. And the other one was, he's talking about staying consistent with your policies. Remember, that means that you've got to train your supervisors on exactly what your policy is. Do your team leads speak that language that the company has chosen in regards to their policy for this particular action? If the company has a policy and then all of a sudden the team leads are allowing things on the floor that as a company you've decided not to do or that shouldn't be happening, you've got a big problem. And that will come back and bite you if you try to terminate someone in another department for the same activity with where you are holding the consequences. So that was brilliant, Doug. Thank you so much for listing those 2 points because they've heard that on this show multiple times. What about exceptions? Because you in the pre-show, you mentioned that there are some exceptions.
I think you need to make sure that you remember there are certain positions that are treated separately. If you have truck drivers, for example, they're going to be subject to the Department of Transportation rules. So even if you may have a relatively permissive attitude toward marijuana, those truck drivers are going to have stricter standards. It's required by law. You want to make sure you communicate to those drivers, hey, this is the standard that applies to you. This is set by federal law. We don't have any discretion on this. You want to take care not to be using marijuana or any other unlawful drug. I think I'd also keep other safety sensitive positions in mind. If you have forklift drivers, heavy equipment operators, you might have a more stringent standard for them than you have for somebody who sits at a desk or isn't handling dangerous equipment. And I think you always want to make that clear. One, so that expectations are clear. Two, you want these employees to know that they're not being picked on, they're not being singled out, they're not being discriminated against. You have a legitimate reason for treating them differently than you might treat other employees.
Thank you so much, because you're just moving right into the next question I wanted you to clarify for our listeners. Help them better understand the proper way to do random testing. Because every so often I run across a company that says, well, we just know that he's using, or somebody knows him and knows that he's using. And so we just want to, random test him every so often. Help them understand the terms of reasonable suspicion.
Sure. Well, the first thing I'd say is I typically would avoid random testing. I think true random testing is probably an inefficient use of most employers' resources. If you're going to test, and you don't have to test, that's fine. But if you're going to test, I think the times to test are, after an accident and when there is a reasonable suspicion. And if you're going to test for a reasonable suspicion, it's a good idea to lay out in your policy the general guidelines of what constitutes a reasonable suspicion. I would keep that list somewhat open-ended so that employers have discretion, but I would list some factors. If you see employees having difficulties with their motor skills, if their speech is impaired, if you smell marijuana on somebody, if you see red eyes and people who are sleepy, things like this are signs that there may be marijuana impairment. Now, there may be some other reason for those symptoms, so I think it's fine to have a conversation with an employee and make a determination based on your discretion rather than, hard and fast, someone has red eyes, we're testing. But I do believe it's a good idea to lay out the basic factors that might lead you to test. And then be consistent with those factors. If you're finding that somebody smells like marijuana and you decide to test them, make it a policy that you test everybody who smells like marijuana. Just because we don't want to give employees an opening to say, I've been discriminated against, I've been treated differently here. Now, if you're going to do true random testing, this is where I would not just walk through the facility and stop somewhere and say, I picked you. I would have more of a system that shows, true randomness. You have a random number generator application on a computer, or if you're picking names out of a hat, something where you can show you're not showing bias or favoritism, you're not picking on somebody. I think that's going to give you the strongest defenses to an employee claiming either you've intentionally discriminated against them, or maybe you've had a disparate impact against a class of employees, maybe a race of employees or an age of employees. And you look like you're being, truly fair and random in your approach.
That was absolutely fantastic. And and only because through this interview, I completely forgot. And I think it's important that we mention, remember, ladies and gentlemen, when you're talking to your employees about possible reasonable suspicion of what, you may open them up to sharing medical conditions that you would not have found out otherwise. And remember, those are sacred conversations. You have to make sure that only individuals who have a need to know, and that you're maintaining that information or even utilizing that to offer the other protections that are available to them through ADA or FMLA or any other programs that might be available through your state laws. Doug, I can't thank you enough. This has been exactly what I wanted for these guys. We have not touched enough on this topic, and you are so good at articulating the pitfalls, but also the things that will protect them. Now remember, ladies and gentlemen, he's with Barnes Thornburg. If you need to get a hold of him, you can email him at Douglas?
Douglas.oldham@btlaw.com.
Exactly. And he's on LinkedIn. Go on LinkedIn, tell him you heard him or saw him here on the show, and he's available. Doug, thank you so much. It's taken us weeks to get you on, actually a couple months to get you on, but you're here, and you have helped out.
I'm glad we got it done. I've enjoyed being on. I'd be happy to talk with you again anytime, Pandy.
Oh, I love it. I love it. You have an open invitation. Open invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. We so appreciate you being here, and keep sending in those questions so I know who to bring on for you and get you the answers here at The Human Resource.